All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this webinar presented by Trimble Geospatial. The title of this webinar is Using Trimble Positions to Integrate TerraSync with ArcGIS. My name is Matt Morris. I am a senior product engineer in our Trimble Geospatial division. I've worked on Trimble Positions since its inception. So I came in working on the product right when we started it. So I've been involved with it from the very beginning. We'll try to cover what we need to in about 45 minutes, leaving about 10 or 15 minutes for questions at the end. As a reminder, you are on mute. I can't hear you, but you can hear me. And if there are questions you have, please enter them into the appropriate window in the webinar, and they will be provided to me. And if it makes sense for me to answer it during the webinar, I'll do that. Otherwise, I'll hold some of them until the end. From an agenda standpoint, here's what I hope to cover today. One, an introduction to Trimble Positions. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, or if you already are familiar with it, maybe you'll learn something new. The advantages of direct integration with ArcGIS using Trimble Positions. Cover some overview of the various Trimble TerraSync workflows that we support through Positions, and then the Q&A at the end. First of all, what is Trimble Positions? Well, that largely depends on who you ask. Certainly our people who help sell the product have it, know of it a certain way. We who develop and build the product think of it probably differently. Our customers have exposure to it through how they use it. They may have heard about it from Esri, they may have heard about it from Trimble, one of our dealers, etc. It does consist of multiple applications. You may have heard of extensions and things like that, so there are various applications. It does integrate TerraSync and TerraFlex workflows into ArcGIS. In other words, if you are using Trimble mainline products like TerraSync or TerraFlex, it does provide more native or more deeply integrated workflows into ArcGIS. From an extension standpoint, it does extend Esri's classic data collection products and some developer tools for high accuracy, that being ArcPad and ArcGIS for Windows Mobile. It also provides some data validation tooling in the office, such that you can ensure what the type of data you're collecting, what the accuracy is, the ability to set accuracy thresholds and things like that for high accuracy GNSS work. And it does streamline office to field to office data collection workflows. So if you are doing high accuracy data collection work, you are using ArcGIS on the back end, Trimble Positions is really Trimble's story for how you can seamlessly enable that workflow for high accuracy, whether or not you're using TerraSync, TerraFlex, ArcPad, ArcGIS, Windows Mobile, etc. So there are many workflows that across the Trimble Positions suite of products. On the right here, you have kind of all the field products. On the left, you have the office sites. On the right, we support Trimble TerraFlex, Trimble TerraSync, ArcPad, ArcGIS for Windows Mobile. So the boxes in green are Esri software. The boxes in blue are Trimble software. And so we have extension stories for ArcPad and ArcGIS for Windows Mobile, but we also directly support the TerraSync and the TerraFlex workflow. And in addition, Trimble Unity, which comes out of our Trimble Water group. So then that data gets back to your desktop in various ways. We all know TerraSync and ArcPad, ArcGIS, Windows Mobile are largely desktop-based workflows. TerraFlex and Unity are cloud-based workflows. But on the left, we have an extension for ArcGIS Desktop called Trimble Positions Desktop Add-in. And it is through that add-in that you are able to integrate all these different field workflows into your back office GIS environment. So that is mainly what we'll be talking about today, is the TerraSync workflow within Trimble Positions. So the goal here is for me I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail on TerraSync. You all are largely probably familiar already with TerraSync. What I'm going to talk about is how Trimble Positions integrates TerraSync data much more seamlessly into ArcGIS, and I'll talk about that primarily from the standpoint of Trimble Positions Desktop Add-in, preparing data for TerraSync, getting data back from TerraSync, etc. Now there are two kind of dashed boxes you'll see here at the top for the Trimble TerraFlex Desktop Add-in and the Trimble Unity Desktop Add-in. For those of you who are either using or have customers using one of these two add-ins, they are largely just a special version of the Trimble Positions Desktop Add-in that just supports those workflows. Same code base, same team that develops it. So Trimble Positions Desktop Add-in is kind of the whole enchilada, if you will, for supporting all of the workflows. All right. our goal with the TerraSync workflows, and when we started developing this in late 2014, was to provide a much more productive workflow and a compelling user experience for the TerraSync user, whose workflow starts with data from and or ends by sending data to ArcGIS. So you're getting data out of a FileG database and you're trying to take it out to TerraSync for data collection or data update, and then you want to get it back in at the end. Or you're doing greenfield data collection and you want to be able to get that, you're exporting that data back to ArcGIS at the end. We are all aware that the workflows through Pathfinder Office are, can be cumbersome. Sometimes they didn't work entirely right. You had to export the shapefile and you lost some attribution, or you lost fidelity, or you were working with the FileG database export. And so there was a lot of, that process has been fraught with difficulties for a while now. And so I think what we wanted to do is primarily address that. And we've done that through this Office side functionality exposed through Trimble Positions desktop add-in for ArcGIS Desktop. It is for ArcMap. We've gradually increased support for these workflows over the last 3 or 4 releases dating back to late 2014. And fundamentally, the reason it's advantageous is it avoids any shapefile or FileG database export and any loss of attribution in the process, or names getting truncated or things like that. So we basically support directly connecting to, because it's running in ArcMap, it's connecting directly to your geodatabase sources, and then it's taking that data and schema and taking it out to TerraSync. And so when you bring the data back in, again, you're doing it from within your Esri environment, so there is no need to export and lose any data or go through complex conversion steps in the process. The post-processing environment and the QA/QC is then also done within ArcMap. So you'll see in one of my demos that in this dockable window that sits inside ArcMap, you have the ability to do the post-processing, to dive in and look at the properties of the session, to look at the details of the features and geometries and all that kind of stuff. We also then provide GNSS metadata transfer direct to feature attributes. So after you collect data, you've done your QA/QC, now you want to update those high accuracy geometries back to your Esri geometries. We also give you the option of transferring metadata, data about the GNSS, into those feature attributes too, such that then your Esri feature is stamped with the accuracy value, the feature heights, things like that. From the basics, we support enterprise file and personal geodatabases. We support the last few versions of ArcGIS for desktop, so we're at 10.4, 10.3, 10.2, and we'll be supporting 10.5 hopefully when it's released. We support most geodatabase concepts, so whether you have your data modeled as feature data sets, feature classes, geometric networks, we have some support for working with data in geometric networks. The use of domains, which would be defining valid values for a field, right? You can have something called a coded value domain, which is where you're saying, I want to allow these 5 values in this field, or a range domain, which is a kind of a min and max. Subtypes, so a subtype is a way to, for example, I have a valve layer, and I want to have 5 subtypes. I want to have a pin valve, a gate valve, a butterfly valve, a clay valve, and a plug valve or something. Those would be subtypes. Same attributes, but they can have different domain values and different default values, etc. And the last thing on the list was default values. We support any of the default values, or fields are required, fields are not required. Those are all supported and come out to the field into TerraSync based on whatever you have defined in your geodatabase. We support both real-time and post-process workflows. So although the post-processing is done in ArcMap from within the Positions desktop environment, you also have the full ability to use all the capabilities of TerraSync with setting up TerraSync for real-time sources, etc. And any data that comes back in will be seen as being real-time and corrected in the field. Like what I mentioned before, that metadata is available for transferring back to feature attributes. As of the most recent release, we do include several core Pathfinder Office utilities with Trimble Positions desktop. So we include the data dictionary editor, data transfer utility, and the SSF record editor. Come as an installation option when you install Positions desktop, and they can use a license of Positions. They don't need a separate PFO license to use them. And there are multiple workflows. So there's 2 workflows that I'm going to talk about. One is this kind of it's planned work. You have things modeled ahead of time. You're going to do kind of a check-out, check-in workflow. And the second workflow I'll talk about is kind of an ad hoc or after the fact workflow, where meaning that you're sitting around now, you have an SSF file or you have a DDF file and you want to get it into ArcGIS after the fact. So we'll talk about that as well. All right, so I've kind of broken the planned workflow into 2 steps. One is kind of this initial project creation, which you would do, presumably a few times, maybe once to get the project started. And then the second step would be the day-to-day workflow. So from a project creation standpoint, and I'll walk through this in the demo. The first step would be you'd author your geodatabase schema and your map document in ArcMap, like you normally would. You then, as an Esri user, you would then create a Trimble Positions project that defines what layers you want to use for data collection, what you want the accuracy thresholds of those layers to be. Do you want to set minimum accuracy requirements? And also to define which fields in my feature classes do I want to transfer that GNSS metadata back into. And those settings are per layer. You then, at that point, you would reopen the project and you'd save it out to a DDF, okay? So there's a screen for this. And you can then take that DDF right out to the field and start doing work in it. If you're not interested in the data, in checking out existing data, if you want to just do new data collection. You also have the option of opening up that DDF in Data Dictionary Editor, setting symbology, setting feature defaults, making other changes that are specific to TerraSync logging options, things like that, and then saving those changes to the DDF file. Again, you can take that out and use it. But then the best step would be then there's a way to import that DDF back into Positions, such that now Positions knows that you've edited that DDF, such that the next time you export data or the next time you check out data, it will apply those DDF settings for those changes that you just made. But again, steps 3 through 5 are optional. All right, so the day-to-day operations, so what you would do every day. Assuming you are interested in taking existing data out to the field, you would do a checkout, and this is done from within the dockable window. Select features, do a checkout, and then you'd have your SSF for taking out to the field. If you're interested in new data collection only, you would take that DDF out to the field and transfer it to your field device, collect data using TerraSync, and when you come back, you would do a check-in, and you take that SSF that you collected, get it onto your desktop, do a check-in. You would automatically create the geodatabase features, and you'd have your session to work with where you could post-process it, do QA/QC, and then when you're done, update your geodatabase features, and this is just clicking a button, update your geodatabase features with high accuracy geometries and metadata. I did want to put in here at the bottom where it says steps 3 through 5 can be automated with Trimble Positions Session Processor. So the Session Processor is a tool that we came out with a couple years ago for kind of like headless processing of sessions on a server machine or some other sort of non-UI type machine. It does require a license of ArcGIS Desktop, but what it can do is it watches certain folders. You configure it and say, I want to watch this folder, and anytime an SSF gets dropped in there, I want to process it using these settings. I want to post-process it. I want to automatically update feature geometries, etc. So that's what Session Processor is. All right, so demo 1, planned workflow. So what I'm going to do here is go over to my ArcMap, and hopefully you can all see this when it comes up here. So here's my ArcMap environment. I've modeled a section of my kind of the area near where I live here. I have some aerial photo base maps. I have parcel boundaries, and I have some data that I've already collected. Now, the storage behind this is Esri's local government information model. So you'll see layers that you may be familiar with, pavement marking lines, signs, poles, trees, etc. And if I open up one of these, properties in one of these layers, I'll see the fields all have aliases, and if I look at the right, I'll see that some of these here's a coded value domain, right? So this would be like a select list, etc. for this field for shape of canopy on trees. But this is all just kind of Esri standard data model that I've used for this. I have some utility layers. I have sewer manholes, water hydrants, etc. I happen to be a water utility guy going way back, so a lot of my demos tend to weave in water and wastewater data sets. So basically, I've modeled my data. I have it set up the way I want. I have it symbolized the way I want. So at this point, my Trimble Positions toolbar consists of 2 tools, and I have one button that opens and closes an administration window, and the other button which toggles the dockable window here at the bottom. And the dockable window is where you'll be working with sessions and things like that. So the first thing I'll do is go ahead and click the administration button, and I see I have some kind of administrative options here, and I'll click the first one that says projects. Empty list of projects. Trimble Positions desktop add-in does use a kind of a desktop side database or an office side database to store project definitions. When you bring data back in and check it in, it's where we store the sessions, things like that. All of the Esri feature stuff is stored directly in the geodatabase, but we do have our own little database there that sits on the desktop to store project definitions and things like that. So I'll go ahead and click the Create button, and here I have what's going to be kind of a Create Project wizard. And here I have the ability to create different types of projects for those different types of workflows that I mentioned earlier, ArcGIS, Windows Mobile, ArcPad, Quick Project, TerraFlex, TerraSync, etc. And incidentally, this list is customizable. You can remove items from this list using, there is a configuration tool you can use if you know you're only ever going to work with TerraSync projects and you don't need all these other options in there. You can remove those options through a configuration in the configuration tool. Go ahead and click TerraSync, and what it first does is does a quick compatibility check of my map document to make sure that I'm using features and using coordinate systems that are going to be supported. You'll see that if I start picking one of these other things, I may get, this one looks pretty good, but I may get some warnings in some of these other project types to say, hey, this one coordinate system isn't supported or whatever. So what we're doing is trying to give you an idea right at this point that your map document is set up correctly and will work properly for this TerraSync workflow. The bottom section here indicates the datum information that we found in the map document. In order to work with GNSS data, we need to know what transformation you want to use from the WGS84 GNSS data to your map document. And in this case, I already had defined a transformation in my map document. So it said, hey, I found that here. If it doesn't find one, then there's the ability for you to select one to say which datum transformation do you want to use for working with the GNSS data. All right, go ahead and click Start. First thing I get is a list of, here's all the layers, the compatible layers it found in the map document that can be used for data collection. And I get the layer, I get the feature class name underneath it, a geometry type, and if layers weren't compatible, I could check and uncheck this box to toggle that. If I was looking at data from multiple workspaces or multiple geodatabases, I could select that from this list and toggle between the different workspaces in this map document. These are basically, I'm just going to create a project for all of these. And I'll go here, and this next screen is setting my kind of settings or properties per layer. As I click on a layer, you'll see that this right side enable, this is where I set my metadata transfer field and my accuracy threshold. So for example, for this polls feature class, or for this polls layer, I can set accuracy threshold. I can say, where do I want to transfer horizontal estimated accuracy? Well, in this data set, I already have a field for it. So I'll say horizontal estimated accuracy, vertical estimated accuracy I want to store in that field, and feature height I want to store in that field. I also want to set an accuracy threshold on this data. I'll call it, maybe I want meter data for poles. For manholes, maybe I want also meter, and then for trees I don't care as much about, so I'll say 3 meters on that. If one of these, if for example trees didn't have a particular, let's say, let me find a field here, like for example, parcel vertex. If it didn't have an existing field called horizontal estimated accuracy, it gives me the option to add a new one on the fly. So what this allows me to do is, while I'm creating this project, I can actually it'll create new fields in those feature classes on the fly. It'll only do that for personal and file geodatabases. It won't do it for enterprise geodatabases. You would have to set those up yourself using standard ArcMap tools, and then they would be available here in the list. If you are not sure what data types it's looking for or what fields are listed, you can mouse over the description of that metadata item, and it'll give you, well, the name of it, it'll give you a description, and it'll tell you the data types. You see the end here, it says double data types. So most of them are double. There are a few that are text that I will cover later. Okay, so I've set up here, I have my, let's see, I set up poles with a 1 meter and I set up my when my accuracy threshold. I set up my accuracy threshold and I set up my metadata fields. Now it does have this note up here that says these are office side processing only. So what that means is this is not metadata that's going to be transferred out in TerraSync. It's going to be transferred when you bring the data back to the office. There are other workflows in Trimble Positions that we support where the metadata is transferred both in the field and in the office. So for example, in the ArcGIS for Windows Mobile workflow, the settings you make here also apply in the mobile, such that while you're collecting in the field, you get those attributes populated in the field as well. In this case, it is just when you bring that data back in. All right, so I've set a few of my layers here just for samples, as with the metadata and the accuracy threshold. Incidentally, if I want to bulk set accuracy threshold, if I want to set more than one layer at once, I can hold Control down and put a value here, and then click it, and then that applies now to all 3 of those layers. So you don't have to sit there and do it one by one. All right, so at the very end, I get a ability to give my project a name. This is the name that it's referred to from within Trimble Positions desktop. And I have some other choices here for how I want accuracy reported. I give you the option of RMS or 2D RMS. And then we also have the ability to specify how you want feature heights handled. The default will be height above ellipsoid. If you have geoid grid files, which I don't right now on this machine, you'd be able to pick them from the list here. Like if you had GGF files loaded in a particular folder, it would see them here, and you'd be able to specify that, and then it would calculate. You'd get mean sea level elevations using those using that geoid grid file. For now, I'll just leave this height above ellipsoid, and I click Finish, and it says it created a new project for me. Now it does say it's skipped a field. My construction points layer is subtype, and it is going to skip the field that ArcMap uses to identify those subtypes. It's like a subtype identifier. So it's not going to put that in the data collection field for TerraSync. And the reason it doesn't is because when TerraSync sees this, these will each be individual feature types in TerraSync. So the way a subtype works is it gets exploded when it goes out to TerraSync, and each of those subtypes gets its own feature type created in TerraSync. All right. So now I have that project created. And like I said, at this point, if I open it up, if I edit it, now I have a new screen here that starts as my first screen in the wizard. Then I can save this out to DDF. I'm going to go ahead and click Save to DDF. And now I have that DDF saved. I could take that DDF, go out, and start doing work with it in TerraSync. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and edit it. And I'm going to click this. It's going to open up Data Dictionary Editor. And what I can see here is I can see now the representation of my ArcMap data in a format that TerraSync understands. So this is in this DDF. So you see that that construction points layer that was subtype now exploded itself into these eight different types of construction points with all of the same attributes. And so I have my pavement marking line, which is a line field, line geometry. I do see here that I have some menu items that came from my coded value domain. So for example, condition, here's those domain items that came across as a menu type attribute. If I had default values, if I had fields that are required, data types, all that stuff comes across. Let's say I want to change some symbology at this point. So of my polls, I'll go ahead and click Edit, and I'm just going to do something quick. I'll just change the color on this to something more obnoxious. And I'll do the same for sanitary. I'll do the same for manholes. I'll make this another very obvious color, nice cyan. I'll do the same for valves. Just making some changes here in my symbology, which is something that you would, this is a really relatively common operation you would do in the Data Dictionary Editor, as far as changing symbology of what you want to collect in TerraSync. And then I'll just do signs. All right. And I'll pick signs, and I'll pick this green color for signs. All right, I'll save this. So now I have some, I've adjusted some of the symbology here. Click Save. So now that's saved to the DDF. Now I can go out in the field and use this. But the best thing to do now is this third button here says Update from DDF. Update the current TerraSync project with the changes made to the DDF. Because that data dictionary and the DDF file now sit external to Trimble Positions, we need to update Trimble Positions with those changes you just made. And the way you do that is you click this last button here called Update from DDF. It's already got the name you previously used. And then what it did is it just sucks that DDF back in, and it knows that you now have made changes to that symbology, such that the next time you save next time you click Save to DDF, it'll have those changes in it. Similarly, the next time you check out data, it'll check it out with those settings that you just made. All right. I'll go through the rest of the wizard here. If I wanted to make further changes to the metadata fields, I can do that after the fact. I can do that at any time. The ability to add new metadata fields, different accuracy thresholds, et cetera. Because remember, those are populated when you bring data back in. They don't affect actually what's in the DDF itself. What's in the DDF is the schema, data if you check it out, and the symbology. Okay, so that's the basic workflow of setting up that project. The user experience for checking that data out is down here in the dockable window. In this first button, check out, check in, I have two options available to me. Check out SSF to TerraSync or check in SSF from TerraSync. If I click check out, it's going to give me a message to say, hey, you can't check anything out if you don't have any features selected. If you want to go start out with empty data, you would just take the DDF, which you already saved. What I can do at this point, if I want to check data out, I can use standard ArcMap selection tool. So ArcMap has a variety of selection tools. I can do filters by attributes. I can do these different select tools I have. For now, I'll just do a really quick kind of marquee selection. I have features selected, and I'll say check out. Sorry. I do have ArcMap's notification at the bottom that there are 22 features selected. Oops, you didn't see that. It went too fast. Check out SSF to TerraSync, and this is my one that I'm going to check out. I'll say save, and it says it checked out 22 features and 6 project layers to the SSF, but some attributes were skipped, and that's because of that subtype field that didn't get included. All right, so now I have that SSF I can take out, start doing work, edit existing features. I can add new features to it, and then when I'm done, I'd come back here and check in, and it'll just ask me, it'll browse for that SSF file. Now I'm going to show you the second half of this, that check-in workflow I'm going to cover in the next demo. All right. So the second workflow that I want to talk about is kind of this ad hoc or import workflow. So this would be a case where you have an existing SSF or DDF file. Okay, this is data you've already collected. Maybe it includes generic features. It's based on your own data dictionaries you've already used, or it is a data dictionary you've already set up, and you'd like to import that very quickly and easily into a geodatabase, get those sessions in, work with them. Optionally, I want to be able to get that schema in such that I can maybe create a different type of project. I want to bring a schema in from an SSF or DDF and then use it for a TerraFlex project or use it for an ArcPad project. So the basic workflow here is there's a separate type of project you saw there, and I'll show you in a minute, called a TerraSync import project, and this is where you're able to create a new positions project by browsing to an SSF or DDF file. What it'll do is it'll read the schema out of that SSF or DDF and create a file geodatabase and create new layers in an empty map document. You then have the ability to run through the normal check-in process. Check in the SSF, check in that data, it creates the geodatabase features, you can post-process, perform your QA/QC, and then update your geodatabase features. Now, steps 2 to 4 here, check in, post-process, QA/QC, update features, those are part of the planned workflow. So that's why I said I wasn't going to show the second part of that workflow, because I'm going to demonstrate it here. And it also supports generic features. So this was an area of when we first released the TerraSync support within Trimble Positions, generic features weren't supported. Now they are through this workflow. Okay. While I'm looking at the list of questions coming in, and there are a couple questions that are relevant at this point, does the checkout lock down the data, or is it just a copy? And if there are conflicts, how are those handled? So this is not, it's not locking down the data in any way in ArcMap. Okay, all this is doing is taking a copy of that data out. There's nothing being stored in the geodatabase to know that that data has been locked out. So basically, the way any conflicts would be handled is, last in would win. So if you took data out, and then in the meantime you edited that data in your office, when you check the data back in, it would largely replace the attribute values on those, whatever changes you made would be replaced by what you checked in. So we're not putting any locks, nothing on the Esri feature class. So that would be up to you to define right business processes for avoiding that type of situation. All right, let me go back to my ad hoc workflow here. And the first thing I'm going to do, you'll see that if I just, let me deselect this. If I came up here and tried to start a new Trimble Positions import project, you'll see it shows up right here in the list, TerraSync import from DDF SSF. It'll say, hey, a project can't be created without an empty map document. So there's an example of my current map document is not compatible with that particular project type. Go ahead and click New, and I'll start just a blank map. Sure, I'll save changes. So now I have an empty map document to start with. All right, and I will go ahead and click that button again, Projects, and I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to choose that option to import from a DDF or SSF. So I have two options here. I select the folder, or I select the DDF or SSF that I want to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and pick this first one I'm going to do. I'm going to try to do a couple of these because they're all illustrative in their own ways. First one I'm going to pick is just some relatively simple ad hoc data collection that I did out here in the same location near my house, also called Buena Vista. Now the next thing I have to do is I have to pick a folder where I want Positions to create that file database and create that map document. So I'm going to go ahead and create it in my webinar folder here, and under existing SSF, I'll create one called import Buena Vista. All right. Click next. So again, the first thing it's gone out now is gone and read that SSF and extracted schema from it and found that, well, in this case, all I had was I had the three generic layers in there. I had area generic, line generic, and point generic, and it's created a file G database for it, and it hasn't yet added it to my map document, but it will shortly. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and set, at least on my point generic, I'm going to go ahead and create some new metadata fields on the fly. So I'm going to say I want to create a new field called horizontal estimated accuracy, a new field called vertical. I want to get feature height. So a word here about elevation handling. I showed you earlier that in the project settings, you can specify whether you want elevations to be handled as ellipsoidal heights or mean sea level through a geoid grid calculation. If you have a Z-enabled feature class, if you have a 3D-enabled feature class, the Z values will be updated for points, lines, and polygons based on geometries you're getting through Trimble Positions. If you only have a 2D feature class, then you'd have to store the feature height as an attribute. But again, if you have a 3D-enabled feature class, and based on the coordinate system of that 3D feature class, the units of that will be converted. So if it's a WGS84, or if it's if you're using like a vertical coordinate system in feet, then it'll store the feature height in feet. If you're using one in meters, it'll store it in meters. Same thing for the metadata. The accuracy values will get converted, stored as meters if you're using like a geographic coordinate system. And if you're using a projected coordinate system, for example, like a NAD83 state plane with horizontal units as feet, it'll store the estimated accuracy metadata as feet. All right, so I created my metadata there. If I scroll down the list, I'll see that I have some new fields available to me. And I'm going to find here these ones at the bottom called project name, session name, and device type. So those are now available as transferable metadata. And then I want to set an accuracy threshold of 2 meters. All right. So this is my Buena Vista SSF import is what this is. I'll leave my elevation handling the same, click Finish, create a new project. Now at this point, what I have is I have a schema-only project. Okay, so I have, here are those layers that is found in the SSF that is imported. So all I did was I create that, imported it. Now I have empty feature class, and I have layers in a map document for that data. And maybe that's enough for what all I wanted to get with schema, but in this case I actually want data. So now I'm going to come down here and do the check-in workflow. Click on the button. First of all, I can confirm here that it is the active project. I see here at the top of my dockable window, I see that it says current project Buena Vista SSF. I'll go ahead and click check in SSF from TerraSync, and I'll find that Buena Vista one. And it says successfully checked in one session from the SSF file. Here I have that one session, and if I look at the map, I see the kind of the rough boundary of that the boundary of that session. I have some really basic points in it. It wasn't a very exciting session of data collection. And I have some notes here about where it was checked in from. If I right-click on this session, I have some options here to look at properties of this session. So this is a way I could look at what receiver it was. I could see, is it H-star capable? Is it centimeter capable? Does it have dual frequency data, et cetera? So that's available here. I also have the ability to look at some very basic troubleshooting info if I want to look at some very basic line graphs of satellite count and average signal to noise ratio. If I'm curious what happened at a particular part of the session, I can do that. But what I want to show you is when I go into the feature here, what I can see is now I'm looking at all of the features within this session, and I see that they're not meeting my accuracy threshold of 2 meters. So I see they have insufficient accuracy. If I go look at one of these and I go to View Positions, now I see the individual positions within a feature. And if I zoom into this particular thing, I'll see that I can turn on accuracy outlines for those features, and I should have some big circles around it. So those are all each individual position within this feature. And then I can, if I have an ascending position, if I have a real outlier, I can choose to remove it from the construction. So I have very granular tools for editing geometries. Now this is our representation of the geometry. That if I make edits to this, we recalculate a geometry, and then you can update your Esri feature geometry with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, you know what, this data is really bad. I want to post-process it. So I'm going to come out here to my administration window, and I'm going to say, I need to set up a processing profile. So Trimble Positions works on this concept of processing profiles, where you, instead of having to select a base station every time, you select a base station as part of a profile. So I'll call this something basic DB, and I'll make a cores base station here. I'll use a cores base station, select base station. Now in this case, you have your familiar base station list, and it's going to default to what's closest to my center of my map, and I'm going to use this JPL cores site. And I can look at the properties of my base station. This is a very similar screen to what you're used to seeing in Pathfinder Office or even other Trimble software. I have some options here, whether I always want to select the last corrected results regardless of accuracy, or whether I want to always recorrect real-time corrected positions. And those can be changed later. Now I have a processing profile, and now I can come down here and click correct, and I have that session, and I can say I want to use this profile. I can also associate a device with a profile. So my device, when I checked it in, is called device 1. I can associate that to use a default profile, such that I wouldn't even have to select it from the list. It would automatically be selected. If a particular device was always being used in a certain area and you always wanted to use the same post-processing settings, you can always change it, though. I'll go ahead and click correct, and it's going to go out and it's going to download that base station data, and it's going to do that correction. And what you'll see is that at the end, I now have hopefully, feature geometries that meet my accuracy threshold. Now this isn't controlling the logging of those features in the field. It's not accuracy-based logging, but what it is accuracy reporting after the fact. And when you saw those red messages that said insufficient accuracy, it won't let me transfer those geometries to my Esri feature class, my Esri features, because it's not meeting the accuracy threshold that I set. So once it downloads this data, it does its post-processing, and the underlying post-processing engine here is the same as it is in PFO, so the results should be comparable. It's different wrapping around it, and it might be a slightly different version, depending on what version of PFO you're using, a slightly different version of the post-processing engine, but it is the same engine itself. So I get my results that say 85% of my positions are in 0 to 5 centimeters. The other thing you're seeing here, this is post-processing with centimeter level receivers. That is now, it will be available in the release this quarter for post-processing data from TerraSync Centimeter Edition, and there will be an ArcPad extension centimeter and a mobile extension centimeter as well that'll support the 7x centimeter, the 6,000 centimeter geos, and the R2 centimeter. Okay, so now if I go back in here and I look at my features, I'll see that now I can sort this list and see that now my worst feature accuracy is better than 0.5 meter, so everything meets my accuracy threshold. And I can also see now offsets between, so the green is the positions, the new geometries, and the kind of the brown is what my initial feature geometries were in Esri. So I can see this kind of offset, and all my positions now are going to be adjusted. Same thing, come over here. I see that my status is now post-processed, New in this version, we also have the ability to show extended data here. If you're really curious about the nitty-gritty and you want to look at type of correction, PDOPs, satellite lists, things like that, you can get all that now information here. And also, if you right-click in this grid, I can export all this to Excel. So if I'm really curious about what's going on in a particular feature, I have the ability to see that now. If I was interested, if I was doing line and polygon work and I wanted to see what constructions made up a line or polygon, let's say I did vertex, vertex, and then some sort of, a track that I walked, I can use the tree view of a position to look at the individual components of those geometries. And then it would show me, vertex, vertex, average point, and then the track construction. So I can edit all that at a very granular level if I want to. All right, so that looks good, and now I'm going to come down here and hit Update Features, and now what it's going to do is going to take those geometries and take that metadata and update my Esri features. Click OK. So now you saw that my feature shifted because now they have the new geometries, and if I come in here and open my attribute table, I'll see that I have now my metadata populated. I have my horizontal estimated accuracy, vertical, feature height, the project name, the session name, which is basically what device and a start and end time, and then the type of device that was used. So now this is all available. For whatever your workflow is in GIS. I did see a question come in that says for shape Z files, you said it'll convert meters to feet, but will it actually convert a height above ellipsoid to orthometric height? Yes, that is in the properties of the project. If I came over here to the last page of the project, I have this option here called feature heights. If I were to if I had SSF files sitting on my machine, I would select this last radio button, calculate geoid separation from file. I'd pick that GGF file from the list, and then the next time I updated feature geometries, I would get that Z value, and my metadata would be using the mean sea level value. All right. So that's the kind of the back half of the check-in workflow and also that kind of ad hoc workflow. All right, so getting up on time here, and I'll highlight a couple new areas of functionality, and then we can wrap it up with questions. So as I mentioned, as I alluded to, we do have a new release that's coming this quarter. So what I showed you, the code that I'm showing you is the new release, and if you saw the version, assuming Esri releases 10.5 in this time frame, our release number will be 10.5.01. If Esri doesn't release 10.5, then we'll decide whether it'll be still 10.5 or whether it'll be 10.403, I think is what it would be. All right, so the biggest thing we've done is we recognize that there has been pain points around having to set those metadata fields every time and set accuracy thresholds every time. If you reuse the same layers in multiple projects and having to reset that every time, set those things every time is a pain. So we have something now called the feature type library, which allows you to store common layer settings to reuse in other projects. Accuracy thresholds, metadata transfer fields, TerraSync symbology, and feature defaults now can be stored and used in future projects. We also have better support for editing geometric networks. So you can edit existing point, line, and polygon features that participate in geometric networks. So you could check those out, take them out, edit them, edit the geometries, and when you come back, those features will still be connected, and it'll adjust connected features. So if you take a hydrant and move it, and it's connected to a hydrant lateral, it'll move the hydrant lateral as well when it gets checked back in. So that's Esri functionality that now we are working with properly. If you want to collect new features, those features will be brought in, but they won't be connected to the network. One thing you also saw is that centimeter level post-processing, so now we can finally work with TerraSync centimeter edition and the Geo 7X and 6000 centimeter and R2 with centimeter data. Extended metadata support. So you saw some new fields in there, which is what you weren't there before. So we have the worst horizontal and worst vertical accuracy. We have feature height for point geometries. Also for line and polygon geometries, we have something called, you have a first vertex height and last vertex height. This was a customer request. And incidentally, if there are comments you have related to future functionality or new functionality you required, please, I'll have my email address up at the end. Please send them in. This product development effort on Positions has been driven largely by dealer and customer feedback. So, this was a direct piece of feedback that we got that, hey, it'd be nice to have for line and polygon features, it'd be nice to pick as a metadata option, first vertex height and last vertex height, so that's in there now. Similarly, they wanted to be able to have northing and easting pop up easily. Yeah, you can get that data out using Esri tooling, but to have it easily selectable as a metadata option. So now we provide X and Y coordinates in the current coordinate system of the map, and that's for point features, point geometries. And then from a data management standpoint, you saw me pick project name, session name, receiver type, so those are also available as transferable metadata. Finally, we did some things around user experience improvements, some performance. There were some issues with post-processing that was took a while to rebuild large sessions with a large number of features or complex geometry. So that's been addressed. We have a new kind of database representation for how we store features and geometries in our database. The last thing is, and this won't necessarily make its way into this release, but we do have some planned improvements to both software and infrastructure to help customers more reliably achieve high accuracy results in GIS workflows. And we don't want it to be as much of a mystery on why sometimes you can get decimeter and why sometimes you can't. So we want to try to, and that involves changes to how we distribute potentially base station list and what's in the base station list and improvements to the software to make it easier and more reliable to get high accuracy data. Okay, so the last little demo here I'll do, and this only takes a few minutes, is this feature type library. So I'm going to go back to my original project that you saw me work with, this Buena Vista one, and let me select the project from the list here, Buena Vista plans. So now it's my current project. When I click on other functions now, there's a new option that comes up called feature type library. Okay. So what feature type library is, it allows me to say, hey, I want to reuse the settings for a particular layer that I used in the past. So the way I do that is I can click add. It gives me, hey, here's the projects you've done in the past, so Buena Vista plans. And if you remember, I set some custom symbology on, I think I did it on poles, I did it on signs, maybe trees, manholes, and I'll do valves, okay? So those are the ones that I know I set metadata values for, I set an accuracy threshold for, and I may have also updated the symbology using the data dictionary editor, right? So I'll add those. And now what it's done is it's gone ahead and added those, and if I click on this, I'll see that it's a point geometry. I didn't set accuracy threshold on it, but I did update TerraSync info. Poles was set to an accuracy threshold. I did specify these three metadata fields, and I did also have, it has TerraSync info with it. Trees has the larger accuracy threshold, remember, manholes, water valves, etc. So now, by these names, when I create a new project now, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new project, and I'll do the same thing. I'll do a TerraSync project, start a new project, and I'm going to remove some of these guys that I don't want. Let's see, I don't want hydrants or service connections. Now, this new option on this new checkbox at the very bottom says load feature settings from feature type library. If I check that and then click next, now what has it done? If I click on poles, you see it's found those feature types in my feature type library. So it's brought in now horizontal estimated accuracy, vertical estimated. It's already brought in those metadata settings and the accuracy threshold. So for example, trees now brought in 3. So now I don't have to repopulate this every time because I've stored it now, and it's it's really basically using the name and the kind of geometry type to make sure that to find a matching layer, and it does do some kind of schema inspection to make sure it's got the same schema. So you're not just using the same name from a different geodatabase. So it's going to look for the name, and it's also going to look at the schema. All right. So if I save this, I'll call this Buena Vista copy. I'll finish this. Now I'll see that if I come back here, edit it, and if I save this out to a DDF, Buena Vista copy, edit, what I should see is I should see that custom symbology that I added earlier. So now that carried through the feature type library, and I see it now. Those colors were brought in. So now I was able to fully reuse that definition through the workflow. All right. All right. So that was the kind of the highlight of the new release is the feature type library. It is important to remember how schemas are managed. When you first create a project, we take the Esri schema and we store a representation of it in that positions database. And then when you save it out to the DDF, now the DDF has a representation of the schema. If you edit that schema, or you've edited the symbology, The update from DDF is what store button was what stores that definition now back in the positions database such that it's available for checkout. So, what you don't want to do is use data dictionary to go edit schema, right? Because that's what's going to break things. If you go try to add, if you add new things, it's just, you may not be able to check that data back in because now Positions doesn't know how to work with it because it's got new stuff in it. Similarly, with the presence of the feature type library now, the feature type library also stores a snapshot of that schema and that symbology when you created it, and then when it uses that feature type library, it'll populate the new project with that data. You can still take it out to the field and edit it. Out to the data dictionary and edit it, but you need to be aware of kind of what's going on behind the scenes, such that you're not trying to edit schema in data dictionary editor. That the master schema is what resides in your geodatabase, and if you do update geodatabase schema, you need to be aware of this when you want to propagate that change out to the DDF or out to future SSFs and checkouts. All right. More information, trimble.com/positions. We also have a positions blog that our team maintains. There's my email address. If you don't get it now, you can look at the recording later. Again, your feedback is welcome and much appreciated. All right, so let me take a look at some of the questions that have come in the last few minutes here. We have about 8 minutes left. First question is, will you be releasing a version for ArcGIS Pro anytime soon? That is a great question. The answer to that is anytime soon, no. We are engaged with Esri actually we were engaged early on with the Pro SDK team, and so we have a rough awareness of what it would take to do it, but we don't have it on in our roadmap, on our plans right now to actually do that work, but it is something that we have considered, and I would definitely encourage you to provide that feedback through your channel, if you are a dealer or a customer, to provide that feedback back such that it can get prioritized. We share a lot of our projects across multiple staff. How does a local project database work in this type of environment? So one of the things, I could show you real fast. It's always dangerous to do something on the fly that you didn't practice. But what I can do is show you this desktop configuration item. And, oops, I don't have it shared. Never mind. What I was going to show you is we have a configuration. I'll do it this way. We have this desktop configuration item that I mentioned, desktop configuration. And what this allows you to do is, oops, but that's not it. Well, that didn't work the way I expected it to. But what the desktop configuration tool allows you to do is set up a different office site database. So I'm just using a local single user JET or Access database, but I can set up that database to make it shared. I can set it up on a SQL environment or Oracle environment, any ODBC data source, and as long as all the machines have access to it and it's configured properly, all the machines connecting to it would share those configurations or would share those project definitions. So everyone who came along and opened up the project list would see the same list of projects. So that's how you would address that. All right. Let's see. So we talked about the checkout and it does it really lock it down. So we have the ability to use corrected data from differential correction. So I did show how that differential correction works. The one thing the one thing I didn't show necessarily when I go over here to my, I think it was this one. The one thing I didn't show was how you can restore. This is somewhat new functionality. If you didn't like the post-processing results, you can simply right-click on it and say Restore to Original. That was added as more getting some of that PFO functionality in there to very quickly restore to the uncorrected state. And now if I go through here and look at this, I'll see that I'm back to my insufficient accuracy. All right. Let's see. Does this update features work with an enterprise geodatabase? Yes, it does. It supports file, personal, and enterprise geodatabases. And so however you have ArcMap connected to your geodatabase, if it has authentication information, if there are secure feature classes, et cetera, whether database authentication or Windows authentication, we inherit, however you're connected to those feature classes through ArcMap is what we inherit. And so if it's a particular version, so one of the workflows that would be common in an enterprise would be I'm working with version data. So that's all supported. And actually, one of the things in this project list that if you're ever curious and you scroll to the right, you'll see there's this workspace details. So in particular for that case, like an enterprise environment where I'm dealing with maybe different geodatabase instances, I have a staging environment, I have a training environment, and then I have different versions I'm using. We do a certain amount of workspace validation to make sure that the project you are trying to open in Positions is compatible or is from the same workspace that is in your map document. So what we don't want someone doing is opening a project and checking data in to a different version than exists in the map document. So we're only going to let you open a project that was created from the same workspace as what's in the map document. So that's kind of what these columns at the end is, kind of just a quick string representation of what that workspace is. If this was an enterprise geodatabase, you would see the username, you'd see that you wouldn't see the real password, you'd see an encrypted string, you'd see the version number, you'd see the version information or version name, and you'd see other information to know. And that'll tell you, hey, why can't I open this particular project? And it would because your map document is referencing a different version or a different workspace in some way. Okay, when feature geometries are updated, can they be displayed differently from positions that have not been updated? So there is some color coding here when I did that correction. So right now, so the symbology you're seeing here is the Esri symbology, okay? When I go into view features, I don't know if you can see that there's kind of this different color now. There's two sets of points now. That is, we're drawing that on the fly, and when I click on this, you'll see that it's kind of hard to see, let me zoom in. There's two things selected, okay? There's this one with the green crosshairs, that's our representation of the geometry, and then there's the cyan, which is the Esri feature selection, that's the linked feature that's selected. So there are different colors at this point based on accuracy. So this feature, if I were to post-process, once I post-process this again, these colors will change. That's not Esri symbology color, that's just what we're displaying on the fly here. So we're not controlling any Esri symbology. Certainly, if you transferred that metadata back in as far as what the accuracy value is, you could put your own rules in place to symbolize things based on estimated accuracy or something like that. But all we do here is for these graphics that are drawn on the fly, same thing when you go into, oops, let me zoom to a feature, and I view positions. Same thing in here, there's color coding on the status of these individual positions within a feature. So right now I'm looking at, I'm looking at something that's uncorrected. An uncorrected position happens to be color-coded blue. If it was a real-time corrected position or a post-process corrected position, it would be a different color. But those don't persist. Those are just available while you're using positions and navigating through, the part of the features and feature geometries and things like that. Would it be possible to get the PowerPoint? So these presentations are recorded and made available later. Is the positions database specific to the project or the database on your computer that stores all of your projects? So it is specific to the computer. Like I mentioned, it can be shared though. You can set it up on a shared network location. You could put it in any sort of ODBC data source such as SQL or Oracle and then have multiple people connect to it. So I happen to be using a single one. It also can be set to be, Windows has this concept of a per user or per machine settings, and the same thing applies to positions configuration. It can be per machine or per user. So you could have each user on the same machine have their own database, or you could have it shared on a machine, or you could share it among multiple machines, depending how you want to configure it. Does this feature type library work with TerraFlex projects? That's a great question. If you are doing TerraFlex work, yes, it does. It works across all project types that Positions supports for the most part. There are some exceptions in there, but for the most part, that feature type library can be used across different project types in Positions. The one thing I didn't show is related to TerraFlex is, you saw me import this schema from an SSF or DDF. I could very easily import if it was a DDF that I wanted to import. I'll just do this real fast in the last minute here. If I wanted to create a new project and import it from let's say I had a DDF that had a bunch of symbology in it. I'll click Start, and I'll browse to that DDF. So I have, a complex set of schema that I've done here. And I'll say Import Gas. Click Next, and now it's going to go import a relatively complex, feature feature types that I've defined in TerraSync over the years. And so now I have a whole bunch of empty feature classes in Schema that are now added to my map document. If I want to very quickly get this into, for example, TerraFlex, I can create a new project, and I'll create a TerraFlex project, and it gives me some warnings, but now I can very easily now create a TerraFlex project from that data set, push it up, and now I have TerraFlex forms with the same schema. All right, so hopefully I got to I think most of the questions, but you know, certainly if you have more questions, you saw my email address, it'll be in the recording. But thanks again for your time, and I appreciate you guys sticking around today. A little minute over here.